From KUNC and the NPR network, this is In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. If you visit the Rocky Flats National Wildlife Refuge northwest of Denver, you see miles of hiking trails, rolling prairie, maybe some wildlife. You don't see the astonishing history of what happened there during the Cold War.
The Rocky Flats plant makes plutonium parts for nuclear weapons. Last May 11th, 2 buildings were gutted by fire.
Scientists recently found traces of radioactive plutonium.
People who live near that plant may be exposed to a cancer hazard.
Wastes burned, dumped into landfills, discharged into streams.
Some of the highest levels of radioactive plutonium in the world.
When is enough enough?
That's a clip from a new documentary about Rocky Flats called Half-Life of Memory, America's Forgotten Atomic Bomb Factory. It premieres this weekend at the Denver Film Festival. Filmmaker Jeff Gipe grew up in Arvada, and his father worked at the plant in the 1980s.
When I was growing up, I really didn't know about Rocky Flats, and the workers weren't allowed to speak about their work.
Jeff says he made the documentary to remind people of the hazards buried beneath what's now a wildlife refuge, and also to share the voices of workers whose lives were affected by the dangerous materials processed at Rocky Flats.
I mean, it was so strict that if anyone was even curious about what the workers did, that they were supposed to report that. So there really was no information that was shared from the workers to the outside world and even to their families.
I want to share a clip from an interview you recorded with your dad for the film.
I felt like we were really safe when we were out there. I felt safe. But that don't necessarily mean it was. At the time, you believe one thing, and then as time goes on, you find out, by golly gee whiz, things weren't quite as safe as I thought they were.
Jeff, there's a sense of almost betrayal in what your dad says there. How does he look back on his time there?
You know, I think that there was a lot of camaraderie with the workers because they weren't able to speak about what they did outside of work. So he's still very fond of, his coworkers, and there's still also a sense of pride in what they did. The workers were they are considered Cold War veterans, and they felt like what they were doing was protecting America. Mm-hmm. So there's still a lot of pride, and he's still hesitant to be very critical of the plant and what had happened, even though he's become ill, and so many others have.
Rocky Flats shut down as a nuclear weapons plant in the early 90s. You started work on the film after you attended some public meetings much later in 2016. What was being discussed, Jeff, and what stood out to you about those meetings?
Yeah, those meetings were really focused on the opening of the Rocky Flats National Wildlife Refuge.
Right.
So it was kind of the transition from it being a former nuclear weapons plant to now being a wildlife park. And those meetings were really eye-opening because they were pitched as a public meeting, but unfortunately, the public was not allowed to speak or to raise their concerns. So it was really a one-sided conversation that didn't allow for a lot of the voices and knowledge in the community to be shared.
Yeah, I mean, your footage in the documentary shows officials kind of cutting people off at the mic from sharing their questions and their knowledge.
Yeah, it was an unfortunate situation. I think in one of the first meetings, they tried to allow people to ask questions in a very strange way. Like everyone had these cards where they could agree or disagree. And they allowed a few questions, but very quickly realized that there was concern that they did not want to be out there. There were some media outlets that were there. And so whenever anyone raised concerns, they were immediately cut off in that first meeting. And subsequent meetings, there was no public input.
Jeff, the story of Rocky Flats is out there. It's been covered extensively. What made you want to create a new documentary on this subject now?
I really kind of dove into the research of the plant after I had got some distance from Rocky Flats and from Arvada, where I grew up.
Right.
It was eye-opening. In a way, I'm sort of a product of Rocky Flats, being that my dad worked there and supported our family through that work. I felt like we really need to understand this site. And even I, who, the son of a former worker, had no clue what was going on there.
You interview in the film a former employee named Judy Padilla, who worked there for many years, along with her husband. And I want to listen to a clip of Judy from the documentary.
The people who worked in these nuclear facilities felt, all of them, I can say that, being a worker out there, that they were helping out our country. And we felt that our country would protect us and provide for us. They didn't do it.
We know that so many of the folks who work there, including Judy and her husband, developed cancer. Her husband died from cancer. How hard was it to find former Rocky Flats employees who would speak openly with you?
Almost everyone that I reached out to was willing to speak with me, which I found surprising.
Why is that?
I think there's this perception that, the former workers are kind of guarded, and they were for a very long time. But I think a lot of people also feel very close to the site, having worked there, even residents growing up near the site. There's a very deep connection to it. So I think it's something that they enjoy talking about and are happy to share that information.
One of the central ideas of the documentary is that people have sort of forgotten the radioactive legacy of Rocky Flats. That's echoed by many of the people you interviewed who are concerned about what the site has become. Why is it so troubling, do you think, that it was turned into a wildlife refuge?
The unfortunate side effect of converting it into a wildlife refuge is that it allows people to forget what was there. If you were to go out there, there's no visual, none of the buildings, you can't see any of them. They're buried, they're under the soil. You're also not allowed into the center of the refuge where those buildings once stood. But it's a very beautiful landscape, and there's no signs to tell you the history of the site or that there's remaining contamination. For people that are younger than me, they would have no clue, that this exists. This isn't something that's taught in schools, unfortunately, even though it's a national historical landmark and was the center of the nuclear weapons complex. It seems like it's something that has intentionally been erased, the history of what happened there, and has been turned into a sort of like a triumphant story of, we produced bombs, we won the Cold War, and now there's this beautiful wildlife park that the public can enjoy. These contaminants, plutonium has a half-life of 24,000 years. So in that amount of time, it'll be half as radioactive as it is now. So it's, thousands of generations that this issue will persist, whether people remember it or not.
Jeff Gipe directed and produced the new documentary Half-Life of Memory, America's Forgotten Atomic Bomb Factory. It premieres at the Denver Film Festival this Saturday, November 2nd. We'll have more information in our show notes and at KUNC.org. That's it for us today on In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. Thanks so much for listening.